Now, the next map is a sort of appendage or an intersection between two main maps, and this one's called the Underground Machine, which is basically an underground Scar research outpost. And I think what stands out about this map is that it distinguishes itself from maybe some of the others in that it's pretty conventional, actually, ironically. The greatest part of its individuality is that the player gets to actually choose their path. The player can, basically choose which part of the map they go through, and in some extension, choose where they're going in the plot. And they can either accept the offer made to them and leave, or continue with the mission. And while it leads to the same point eventually, the plot is still something that wasn't really considered as something to manipulate in other campaigns. Visually, there's really not a problem with this map, and it does well to attempt to pretty much use the Scar texture pack to its advantage, along with architecture that's reflective of a Scar base, to look pretty convincing. And overall, it's just one of those small, enjoyable maps that's partly used to further describe the subplot of the mission. Now the next map is the Ziggurat, which I think recaptures the conceptual grandness that invaded the previous two maps. So a player might have noticed the architecture is somewhat reminiscent of Mesopotamian architecture. So this next map is the Ziggurat, which I think sort of recaptures the conceptual grandness that evaded the two previous maps. A player might have noticed that the architecture is somewhat reminiscent of Mesopotamian architecture, and for that, the greater part of this map's best features are its exteriors. For example, the bridge, the exterior of the Ziggurat, the scar base, the temple are all visually neat and sort of make up for most of the simplicity of the interior of the map, and not to mention the simplicity of the exterior of the cave itself. And the crawl bust, or the crawl statues on the bridge, by the way, were made entirely within Unreal Editor by crafting and grouping complex brushes together. So I guess another cool part of the map, but in terms of gameplay, is the invasion scenario, where you have a few minutes to place traps and order the guards around that you're given to certain positions to protect Antarctis from getting killed. And again, that's another approach to doing something different in gameplay than just going from A to B. And there were also a few funny things that sort of threw players off, I think, like the giant reptile in the center or the water crawl that jumped out of the water inside the Ziggurat. And again, those are just, little touch-ups. But there's the interaction and the application of personality to pawns in the case of, for example, the first part of the map where you're presented with that scenario, that little event where those two factions brawl as you go to the temple. It's rare to see something like that in Unreal campaigns. Pretty much the biggest problem with this map, I think, is its overall landscape. The cave pretty much holds everything inside it, but it's pretty empty and it's not left to much decoration. If there were maybe some way to make the cave itself look more convincing, or come up with a better outside world environment, I think it would have definitely helped the overall appearance and atmosphere of the level. One thing I didn't mention was the tournament area, or the arena. that it was also an appendage, although a smaller appendage, of Mission 2.2, and perhaps that could just be considered part of Mission 2.2. But it was separated for a couple of reasons. Mainly because the brushing was too complex to hold within the tower or the Coliseum within Mission 2.2, so it had to be separated. But really, you can consider that maybe part of Mission 2.2. That map, I would say, pretty much shares the same features and the same observation as Mission 2.2. So here we are at our first boss fight. And so remember, this is on heroic mode, so let me list what happens with that in mind. And the boss mechanics and all of that are going to be described. So this boss general mantra basically has 3 different stages. In the first stage, you and your friends beat him down to 80%. And if it's on heroic mode, a few Scar Lords will drop down and help the boss. And it's pretty easy to bring him down to 80% without much effort, and you can pretty much concentrate on those Scar Lords if it's on heroic mode, while your friends handle Mantra himself. But at 80%, Mantra will immediately knock out all your allies, and he also emits a large shockwave. And after that, he will transport to one of the 3 outer rings, I believe. The red, yellow, or blue ones. And the strategy is pretty simple here. You have to match his color with the color of your current staff. So if he's red, you choose your fire staff. If he's blue, you choose your shock staff. If you attack him with a staff that does not match his color, the damage will be reduced. And if it's on heroic mode, it will be highly reduced. And if you attack him with a staff that does match his color, then the damage will be amplified. So I think it depends on which color it is, but it will at least be doubled. He'll also switch to random color every so often during that phase, so you have to keep your distance from the center if you're on heroic mode, because the shockwave will occur every time. And I think there are shockwaves on both heroic and normal mode, but in heroic mode it's a lot more damaging. Now, after you get him to around 20%, he'll stop what he's doing and emit another shockwave, so you have to stay away from him specifically as well. And he'll go to his 3rd phase after that. And in that phase, he becomes invincible when he's in the center ring. And basically these colored spheres will start spawning from each outer ring. And each time a sphere touches him, basically he gains health. So if you're on heroic mode, you can only let around 20 spheres touch him before you wipe and lose. And again, it's pretty much the same concept. You have to match the color of the sphere with your staff to destroy the sphere. So when he's not in the center, do as much damage to him as possible. And that's where the bonus staff is quite useful that you got from this one of the side quests in Mission 2.2. The one where you talk to the guy in church. So when he's not in the center, do as much damage to him. And if you're on heroic mode, by the way, he will have more health added to him with each sphere that touches. And he'll have a bonus addition to his health at 20% once you get him to phase 3. But once you get him below 1%, then you can easily finish him off. So it's just pretty much maintaining the balance between destroying the spheres and then, attacking him as much as possible after that.